And we are rolling, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry for the impromptu break. Well, simply put, I knew I wasn't going to get anything done during the main course of March Madness, and I also got the second shot of the COVID vaccine, and that was an ass kicker. So without further ado, let's get into it. Why did I snap? I'm not going to roll the intro. So throughout sports in general, I have yet to find something so weirdly unique and two-sided as the concept of special teams as there is in football. At any given moment, on any given special team snap, it could be a play that changes the course of a game or a season forever. Or, most often, it could be as mundane of a trip down the field as there ever was. A simple three-point field goal or a punt or a kickoff. Most football fans in general don't really pay attention to special teams. That's usually reserved for the really nerdy ones. And in fact, like myself, as a really nerdy football fan, I really love special teams. Of course, something as game-changing as a punt return or a kick return touchdown or a blocked punt or a muffed kick, those could happen on literally every single snap. But they don't. But the potential is there. The potential for some random guy that barely looks like he should belong on an NFL field to be the hero by sinking a game-winning field goal. Or for some dude who bounced around from practice squad to practice squad, housing a kick to seal a game. That's what makes special teams so unique. None of it is ever about a star player, really. A dead-eye, all-pro kicker or punter is rare to come by. And when it comes to the blockers or the gunners or the long snappers, no one really knows their names, even though their role is intricate. And if they mess up just once, that game-changing play could happen. Now, talking from a more NFL-oriented standpoint, special teams is the dirty work for NFL franchises. If you're not a kicker or a punter, your special teams role is reserved for someone with young and fresh legs, as it is one of the most dangerous jobs in the sport. Two sides of fully grown athletes running full speed at each other, looking to hit the other hard enough to get them out of the play. You can see why they want someone who could take that hit doing that. For those guys, those round 6 and 7 players, those UDFAs that make up so much of an NFL franchise's roster, really the only way they can stick around in a lot of cases is on special teams. If you're a linebacker, running back, wideout, or defensive back that can hit hard but not as hard as guys drafted above you, can run fast but are terrible at the brainy side of football, or a combination of a few other traits, you're most likely going to be stuck on special teams. Combined with the fact that most of these guys are hunting for their jobs or have massive chips on their shoulders because they didn't get a job anywhere else, you can see why special teams is so, let's just say, dangerous, even in a violent sport such as football, and why coaches refuse to send their star guys out there unless it's a really critical down. So let's talk about them. The big phases of the third phase of the game. The one so forgotten by everyone. Let's talk about the guys that are so good at snapping a ball they do it for a decade or more. Let's talk about the guys that, sure, there's always the game-winning kick, or the blocked field goal, or the return touchdown. But let's not forget about the plays that really make up most of the special teams. The guys that can bullseye a punt inside the 10, or put enough pressure in a kicker's face that they miss it. Let's talk about those guys, the dirty work. And without further ado, roll the intro. I don't really have a good intro right now, but on this channel I like to talk sports. So before we get into this, let's talk about one little thing. The positions, or rather, the lack of. Special teams are different from the other phases of the game because of the presence of both offensive and defensive players in position groups. The only true quote-unquote special teams positions are usually just punter, kicker, and long snapper, as they rarely have to do double duty, even with long snappers usually being like an emergency tight end or linebacker on the roster. However, we're obviously going to throw in the other positions, like holders, gunners, upbacks, and return men, what they do, how they help a team, and some of the big names all time. I'm not doing blockers because, well, the job's in their name, and if you're good enough as a blocker, you're probably not on special teams. And I'm going in the way I have them listed in the script, so let's go. Now let's start with the punter. The guy you all know, some of you love for the brand, and most of you probably hate. They're the proverbial white flag being waved on a fourth down. A signal, to be honest, of defeat. It's just a signal that in the previous 3 downs, your offense couldn't get 10 yards. However, punters can be an incredible defensive weapon for your team as much as they are a signal of offensive failure. In the game of field position, a good punter is important for, well, lack of field position. It is much more likely that an opposing team's drive will stall out if they're backed up all the way at their own 5-yard line than they are if they get a touchback starting at their 20. A good punter that can consistently get kicks inside the 10 is invaluable. And so, speaking of sticking with punters, let's talk about the one and only punter in the Hall of Fame as of today. Ray Guy. Ray Guy is, of course, the only punter in the Hall of Fame. He was drafted in the year of 1973, 23rd overall by the Oakland Raiders, out of the University of Southern Mississippi. Guy averaged 44.7 yards per punt over 200 punts in college, while also playing kicker and starting at safety for Southern Mississippi. Against Utah State, he once hit a 61-yard field goal. And in his senior season for Southern Mississippi, he had 8 interceptions, 18 across his entire 3-year college career as well. For the Raiders, he was also their emergency quarterback throughout his entire career. So he was an incredible athlete, which is a thing a lot of people seem to forget about most punters. They're NFL caliber athletes too. Anyway, moving on. In his 14-year career with the Raiders, Guy has a resume that to many is the one of the greatest punter of all time. His career average was 42.4 yards a kick. And his only time he averaged less than 40 yards a kick was in the strike-shortened 1982 season, which he averaged 39.1 yards. Throughout a career total of 1,049 career punts, only 3 were ever blocked. Guy finished with 44,493 punt yards in his career, which now sits at 20th all-time. Now, I know that number of punt yards might not hold a candle to some other all-time greats like Shane Leckler, who's probably going to end up being the second punter in the Hall of Fame, but the fact that Guy was such a trailblazer for his time and for all punters, that really sets him apart. Joe Horrigan, a historian for the Pro Football Hall of Fame, said that Guy was, quote, he was the first punter that you could look at and say, he won games. Guy was known for specializing in the sky kicks, kicking balls so high and so hard that they would sometimes get lost in the sun and make a return man's life a living hell. In fact, after a close loss to the Raiders in the year of 1977, Oilers coach Blum Phillips accused the Raiders of putting helium in their balls because of how high Guy's kicks went. The statistic for hang time in punts was created because of Ray Guy. Despite, well, his numbers looking not so impressive, especially in years past, you cannot say that Guy was not a trailblazer for punters, and shows how impactful they are to games. And now we move on to kickers. Depending on the day, kickers can be either the most celebrated or reviled member of the team. From what I've noticed, it's simple. If you have a good kicker, you won't even notice they're there. They'll jog out for an extra point or a field goal, and you'll know it's just going to be automatic, like that. Think of Justin Tucker, you know? I'm a Packers fan, but, you know, my sort of like my side team is the Ravens, because I love good special teams. That's about it. But kickers, though, usually have as low a tolerance as other special teamers. Miss a couple, boom, you're out. A few go wide or one is blocked, you're off to the curb. Rarely in the modern era are kickers drafted high or drafted at all, because even if you are Mr. Automatic in college, you don't know if that streak will translate into the NFL. Think Roberto Aguayo. The lack of guarantees for kickers means, simply put, there's no reason to invest high picks into them. Throw a 6th or 7th rounder, or more commonly, they're undrafted, and who cares, you'll just find another one. Kickers are usually only given 2nd or 3rd chances based off of reputation alone. Or, in the case of Adam Vinatieri 2 years ago, he was given like 8. And you know what? Speaking of, let's talk about the all-time leading scorer in NFL history. Adam Vinatieri's kicking career began at South Dakota State University, where he was for all 4 years of college. In 1995, he began a semi-pro career for the Amsterdam Admirals of NFL Europe, and in 1996, at the age of 24, was brought on to the New England Patriots. He would make a good impression in his first ever NFL season, including one weird highlight play where he chased down Herschel Walker on a kick return, which led to a then ecstatic Patriots head coach Bill Parcells announcing to him that he's, quote, "You're not a kicker, you're a football player." The Patriots would actually go on to the Super Bowl that year and lose. But either way, the rest would soon become history for Vinatieri. Over 10 years with the Patriots, Vinatieri would kick the game-tying and then game-winning field goal in the 2001 Tuck Rule game in the postseason, in the middle of a frozen New England snowstorm. He would then kick the game-winning field goal in the Super Bowl against the 14-point favorite St. Louis Rams. A short 2 years later, he would win another Super Bowl against the Panthers, this time with another game-winning kick. In 2004, he also led the NFL in scoring, 31 of 33 on field goals and a perfect 48 of 48 for extra points, for a total of 141 total points scored. However, 2005 would be his last year in New England, as they would draft kicker Stephen Gostkowski and let Vinatieri walk in free agency. But his career was far from done. He would go on to the Indianapolis Colts and win another Super Bowl there. Spent 13 more years playing pro football. However, 2 years ago, at the age of 47, he struggled badly. He missed 8 field goals and 6 extra points before being put on IR by the Colts and then getting released after the season. Despite the star seemingly going dark on his NFL career, no one can ever take away Vinatieri's records and the ludicrous amount of those he's amassed. As of today, Vinatieri is the NFL's all-time leading scorer at 2,673 points. He has made the most field goals with 599, attempted the most with 715, most consecutive seasons with a score in 24, the most seasons with 100-plus points scored at 21, most postseason field goals in a career with 56, most points in the postseason with 238, most field goals in overtime with 12, the only player to score over 1,000 points for 2 different teams, the most points in a single postseason, 49, most field goals in a postseason with 14, and the oldest player to kick a 50-plus yard field goal at the age of 46. Yeah, and these were the ones I thought were the most notable. He has a ton more. Adam Vinatieri has built a reputation worthy of the phrase, greatest kicker of all time. In his prime, he was an ice-cold killer. 4 Super Bowl victories to his name. He is also second all-time in the most game-winning field goals in the fourth quarter and overtime with 33, trailing Morton Anderson by only 2 kicks. If there was any other kicker that deserved to moonwalk in the Hall of Fame as soon as he's eligible, it's the Iceman. Now I'm grouping the long snapper and holder together because despite their fairly different roles, the name of the game for both of them is consistency. The role of the long snapper or the holder is critical but often overlooked, and as such a good one could be on a team for years and years and years. Don Malbach, long snapper for the Detroit Lions, has been with the team since 2004. John Denny was with the Dolphins from 2005 to 2018. Their role is often overlooked, but is incredibly important, as bad snaps can often lead to missed kicks or worse, blocked kicks. Most long snappers, though, are rarely ever drafted, and even if they do, they go fairly late. The most recently drafted long snapper was Blake Ferguson out of LSU to the Miami Dolphins 2 years ago, in the 6th round. Traditionally, most long snappers were centers, as their experience snapping plays from shotgun would make it a better choice for longer snaps on punts or kicks. However, tight ends and linebackers were often choices to become long snappers as well. And speaking of players, let's get to holders, who serve another incredibly critical role. Knee down, facing the snapper, raise your arm towards the snapper, catch it with your chest, spin the ball so the laces face out. The holder has as much of a role when it comes to a successful kick as the kicker themselves. They gotta place the ball exactly where the kicker likes it, laces out all the time, every time. Now, there is no role for a designated holder on a team. They are most often punters, but back in the day, backup quarterbacks served the job as holders. But with the expansion of the passing game in recent years and the increased workload of every QB on the roster, that has made it essentially an impossibility. So the job goes to the punter. Holders have to be quick, precise, consistent, or be gone. As if you're a good punter but a bad holder, that could sink your NFL career as much as just being a straight up bad punter. And now, let's get to a position that essentially serves as the quarterback of a special teams unit, the up back. In punt formations, there is one player that does duty as quarterback, last line of defense, or running back and wide receiver on fakes. The up back, or personal protector, or punt protector. Because the punter is so far back from the line of scrimmage in formation, play calling, audibles, and adjustments are on the up back. And if/when people rushing the punter get through, it's the job of that part-time quarterback to give them enough time they need to try and get the punt off or get out of there. Then, when the punt is off, they have to run down there with the rest of the guys covering the kick to try and tackle the return man. Now, one of the few teams in the NFL that stands and has stood a head above the others when it comes to special teams is New England. For the 21 years of Bill Belichick's tenure there, the Pats have finished in the top 10 of special teams rankings 14 times. And they've been willing to make commitments for long-term special teamers, and those commitments have paid off, as you'll see later on. One example was their former up-back, Nate Ebner, who recently went to the Giants to join former special teams coordinator of the Pats and now current Giants head coach, Joe Judge. A rugby prodigy throughout his childhood, Ebner would walk on to Ohio State's football team after 2 years there as a backup nickelback. However, he would really shine on special teams, and at Ohio State's Pro Day, he ran a 4.47, did 23 reps on the bench, had a 10.9-second 60-yard shuttle, and a standing broad jump of 10 feet 8 inches, and stood at 6 foot 205 pounds. That was enough to get him picked by the Patriots in the 6th round of the NFL Draft. Ebner would lead the team in special teams tackles as a rookie, and would go on to play a majority of the special team snaps for the team for most of his tenure in New England, playing as mainly an up back but also as a gunner. In fact, in 2015, you may remember him for attempting an onside drop kick in a game against the Eagles. The Patriots sadly did not recover. Ebner was, of course, one of the classic Belichickian do-your-job players. And in fact, in an interview with the Boston Globe, Belichick stated that, quote, "I would put him in not the all-time top, but maybe in the top 5% of players I've coached in the NFL. His development has been outstanding." Ebner has already had a long and successful career. And at the age of 32, there's still plenty of time for him to make more money doing what he's good at. And now let's move on to, again, not a glamorous position, but as important a position that may come on special teams. The gunner. The position of gunner is a hard one to play. Being that the gunners are the only members of a punt team that can move before the snap, their job is to take down the return man by any means necessary. And being that they're the guys that are most likely the first to get there, the punt return unit has a bunch of guys wanting to stop them from getting there. There's usually 1 or 2 guys trying to stop the gunner from getting to the return man, and they're called jammers. And their job is to essentially block the gunner from getting there at all costs, by any means necessary. And they do not pull punches. Former special teams ace and Buffalo Bills legend Steve Tasker described it as, "You're trying to beat 2 guys in what amounts to a running street fight at a sprint." The role of a gunner is very much so that of be quick or be dead. That's why most of them are defensive backs or wide receivers. Like the next player on our list, in fact. Another legendary Belichickian do-your-job type of man. A New England cornerstone in the locker room and on the field as a gunner, Matthew Slater. The son of Rams legend Jackie Slater, Matthew Slater played his college ball at UCLA, where he played as both a defensive back and wide receiver, and was just kind of okay at both positions. However, where he really shined was on special teams, covering kicks. And after running a 4.4 at the Combine, that was enough to get him selected in the 5th round by the New England Patriots. Slater has played little else besides special teams throughout his entire NFL career. He started returning an errant punt here or there, but he really shined as a gunner. In 2010, Slater wouldn't have a single offensive or defensive statistic, but had 21 special teams tackles in 15 games. However, in 2011, he would see time in both the offense and defense of New England. He would catch the only pass of his career, a 46-yard dot from Tom Brady, and start at safety for 3 games, racking up 6 tackles and a forced fumble. Slater would make the Pro Bowl and an All-Pro team that year, mainly due to his special teams dominance. In fact, over the course of his career from 2008 to 2020, Matthew Slater has made 2 All-Pro teams, first team, and 9 Pro Bowls as a special teamer. Slater is one of the most key members of the New England Patriots, as not only is he a special teams demon, he's also been a critical leader in that locker room his entire time there. Playing such a demanding role at such a high level for so long has already cemented his reputation as one of the greatest gunners to ever play. In 2019, he broke the record for most Pro Bowlers by a special teamer with 8, and with Tom Brady's departure, he is now the longest tenured member of the New England Patriots. And in the 2020 season, he signed another extension at the age of 34. He can still play for a while, and he could walk off right now and still be a New England Patriots legend. But you know, he's coming back for more, and I think a lot of New England fans are thankful for that. And now we move on to possibly the most glorious, if you will, of special teams positions. The return man. Now, the return men always see a lot of the glory because of the boom or bust nature of kick returns. And as such, a lot of them have developed a lot of different styles when trying to take a kick to the house, which fits their body type and, most importantly, their speed, which all good return men must have. You can have the unmatched agility of a Devin Hester, the cat-like quickness of a Dante Hall, or the raw power of Josh Cribbs. But either way, all that matters is they get the ball into the end zone. The holy grail of returns, the touchdown, is a rare occurrence. Most punt returns and kick returns are between 10 to 15 yards, and most kick returns usually end in a touchback. Return duty is mostly saved for young, fresh legs at positions like wide receiver, defensive back, and running back. Some NFL greats have made a living as return men while also playing full-time at other positions, like Deion Sanders, but for this, we're going to be talking more about full career return specialists. The guys where this was/is essentially their only job, and they're good at it. And with people like Devin Hester taking the most of the spotlight as return specialists, I thought it pertinent to talk about another all-time great return man whose name has sort of fallen by the wayside in recent years. Brian Mitchell. Mitchell's dominance appears to be understated, honestly. Even for a guy who's second all-time in career all-purpose yards, Mitchell's dominance appears to have gone understated for some weird reason, as this is a guy who is second all-time in all-purpose yards, behind the one and only Jerry frickin' Rice. Mitchell, in fact, was a quarterback in college for the University of Southwestern Louisiana. He became the first player in NCAA history to pass for over 5,000 yards and rush for over 3,000 yards in a career, and also held the record for most rushing touchdowns by a quarterback with 47. He never returned a punt or kick in college. Mitchell was drafted in the 5th round of the 1990 NFL Draft by Washington, where they would put his services to good use as a running back and return man. He started his career off with a bang, returning his first kickoff of the preseason for a touchdown. And in his rookie year, he'd have 472 combined return yards, but with no touchdown. An interesting tidbit about him, though, he would actually see snaps at quarterback in the infamous body bag game against the Eagles, where all 3 of the starting quarterbacks before him were knocked out. In his sophomore outing, Mitchell would lead the NFL in punt return yards with 600 and punt return touchdowns with 2, and the Redskins would go on to win the Super Bowl versus the Bills. In 1994, 95, and 96, Mitchell would lead the NFL in combined yards. He'd do it again in 1998. The only player with more seasons of leading the NFL in combined yards? Jim Brown. In 1999, he'd be released by Washington at the age of 31. He would then sign with the Eagles in 2000, and over 3 years with the team, become the franchise's all-time leader in punt return yards. He would sign with the Giants in 2003, but was released before 2004. He would then sign a one-day contract and retire as a Washington Redskin, where he would be inducted into their Ring of Fame in 2009. Brian Mitchell is still the all-time leader with punt return yards with 4,999 and kick return yards with 14,014. He retired the all-time leader in special teams touchdowns with 13, but that record would be broken by Devin Hester. He is one of only 5 players in NFL history to record over 4 seasons of 2,000-plus all-purpose yards, along with Marshall Faulk, Tiki Barber, Darren Sproles, and Dante Hall. And sadly, he is still not in the Hall of Fame. He was nominated in 2017, but he also did not make it. And that leads into my next point, the underrating of special teams in general, by the larger football media and the football world itself. But I can see why. It's easy to think how a great tackle you would think It's easy how when you see a great tackle on defense, you would immediately think, oh, that stopped their drive. Or if you see a chunk play on offense, you think, whoa, that put us in scoring position. But I can see how it's harder to think, that punt stopped them from getting an opportunity to score. That return would have been big if it weren't for that clutch tackle. It's just simply not in the stratosphere of most casual fans. That's not a rub on casual fans. They're the backbone of any sport. Special teams is also the most mutualistic position on the football field. A great punt could be null and void with a bad coverage team. A great kicker would lose a couple of points because of a bad holder or a bad snap. This gang of misfits, because that's what they are, can make or break games at a whim. And I love them for it. I have always been a big fan of special teams. In fact, honestly, my love of special teams began early in my football fandom. Darren Sproles was and is one of my all-time favorite players, stemming from New Orleans, really, to his time in Philly, that even when he got older, could take punts and be a threat with them, and was a monster that could convert almost any third down you got him the ball on. The rabbit hole of special teams, for me, was one I fell into early and I will always stick to. And I hope someday the AP poll changes their minds. I hope someday we get to see more and more special teamers in the Hall of Fame. Guys like Brian Lewis, Devin Hester, Steve Tasker, Matthew Slater, Eric Metcalf, Shane Leckler, and even Albert Lewis can make the Hall of Fame. And even guys that are probably never even going to get the Hall of Fame consideration, can be recognized by the wider media and fan base as greats at their respective positions. Guys like Steve Diassi, Kasim Osgood, Mosi Taputu, Brendan Ayamba Deho, I still can't pronounce his last name, Sean Landetta, Larry Izzo, Bill Bates, Mel Gray, and Billy White Shoes Johnson can all get the respect they so deserve for being so dominant for so long. The gang of misfits, the dirty mork men beyond all others, the special teamers. And that's going to be it for me today. I'm sorry if this vid was a bit disjointed. This is the first one I made in quite a while. I apologize for that as well. This was also an old script I had from back in the day that I was saving for a rainy day at times like this. I know it's not my best work, but hey, it gets me back in the track record. I'll be out with a video on the regular schedule next week on some other topic. I got a couple ones in the cookbook, but that's it for me for now. Deuces.